Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Eric Toring. I'm the Senior Vice President for the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine. And I want to welcome everybody today to the Uniformed Services Veterinarian panel that is being hosted by the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine. Just a quick administrative announcement. We've got 6 panelists today from a variety of our uniformed services. And we will ask you that if you have any questions of the panelists, to please enter those questions in the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we will field those questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I will turn this over to Dr. Kristen Voll, who is the chair for the ACVPM's Partners Committee. Kristen?
Thank you, Dr. Toring, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We're excited to be able to offer you this panel. We have an excellent lineup of veterinarians in various branches of the uniformed services. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Speth, Major Terry Schlanzer, Lieutenant Colonel Leah Trapp, Captain Renee Funk, and Lieutenant Commander Andrea Cote. And they're going to share their jobs and experiences in their various branches. And as Dr. Toring said, we'll take questions at the end. So I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist now. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Speth. I'm going to talk to you today about the Air Force, and I'm an Air Force reservist. So what that means is I have a full-time civilian job working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and then I have a part-time military job in the Air Force Reserve. Currently, I'm assigned as the Command Public Health Officer at NORAD and U.S. NORTHCOM, which is one of our geographic combatant commands. I've been there since March of 2018. Next slide, please. So how did I get here? I started when I was in vet school. I did a commissioning program through the Health Professions Scholarship Program during my 3rd year of vet school, and that got me a scholarship for tuition, room and board, and miscellaneous expenses during my 4th year of vet school. So that was a really great option for me. And with that came a 3-year active duty service commitment. So as soon as I graduated vet school, I went right on active duty with the Air Force. Started with officer training, which was about 6 weeks long, then right on to public health officer school, which is about 3 months long. And then I went to my first duty assignment, which was in Anchorage, Alaska. So after I finished my 3-year service commitment, I kind of was figuring out whether I wanted to stay in the Air Force or not. I knew I really enjoyed the Air Force. I loved the mission. I loved the people. But I felt like I wanted to actually get to use my veterinary degree a little bit more, because in the Air Force, you don't do any animal care. It's strictly human public health, no animal care. So I wanted to do a little bit of veterinary, more specific work. So I switched to the reserves, and I've been a reservist for the last 11 years. I started out as what's called a traditional reservist, and that involves the typical thing that you hear people talk about, the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. Sometimes it's more than that, but that's the minimum. And my assignment there was in Maryland. And then I switched to a program called the Individual Mobilization Augmentee Program, or the IMA program. And in that program, you're actually assigned back with an active duty unit. And so you support them often on special projects or certain training missions. And you only have to do 24 duty days per year. And it's a very variable schedule. So it really depends on what your active duty unit needs from you, but it can be tailored a little bit more to your personal schedule as well. So it's a really flexible way to stay in the military, but have a little bit more control over your civilian life. And in the IMA position also, you tend to be able to get away from kind of the traditional base level or unit level public health, which I'll talk about in a minute, and do some of the more career broadening assignments or staff level work, policy work. So I got to work at the Pentagon for several years, working on public health and medical policy for the entire Department of Defense. And then in my current position, I advise the commander on public health issues and requirements for everyone assigned to US NORTHCOM, so that entire command, basically. As a reservist, you can also be activated. So when you're activated, you essentially go back on active duty for a period of time. So in my 11 years, I was activated 4 times for a total of 14 months. So it's usually not too onerous, at least not in the Air Force Reserves, as a public health officer. Obviously, being a public health officer in a public health emergency, such as a pandemic, you tend to be activated a little bit more than maybe you would in normal times. So I've been activated twice in the last 19 months or so for COVID. So at this point, you're probably wondering, well, what does a public health officer actually do? I did post the official job description or duty description of a public health officer in the top. It's a really big, long paragraph, but it's there for your reference. What I like to compare it to, though, is running a local public health department. So as the officer, you're really managing the program and providing the oversight for all of the public health programs that run on the Air Force installation. And then you have public health technicians that work for you that do a lot of the day-to-day activities. So as an officer, you do spend a lot of time doing some epidemiology and looking at disease trends. And then you're providing oversight for food safety programs. So your technicians will be going out and inspecting all the food facilities on base. Same with the public facilities, so the base barbershop, the pool. You're going to be doing communicable disease control. As a veterinarian, you will learn more than you ever wanted to know about sexually transmitted infections, because there are a lot of those in the military population. But that also includes tuberculosis, any other communicable diseases that might pop up, like the case of Giardia, and working with the animal bite program for rabies prevention as well. There's also the occupational health program, which is pretty variable, anything from workplace hazard education to ensuring pregnant workers are protected from workplace hazards, and hearing conservation. Hearing loss is one of the #1 disabilities in the military. So we do a lot of hearing conservation education. And then deployment health, which is very similar in the civilian world to travel health. So looking at the health risks in a deployed location and, providing education, what type of malaria prophylaxis you might need, vaccinations you might need, et cetera. Of course, in the military, you might end up being deployed. Public health officers in the reserves don't have very many deployment opportunities, but on active duty, it's highly likely that you will get deployed at some point. And in your deployed location, you're typically doing basically the same thing you would do at your installation that I just talked about. Usually in the Air Force, we deploy to a more established location, but it's possible that you might deploy to what we call like a bare-based location, or a location that has very limited infrastructure. In that case, you might be involved in advising on site selection and field sanitation. And then in any deployed location, you're going to be looking at disease threats and other hazards in the location and providing education and advising on those threats. There are other opportunities, medical humanitarian missions. I've gotten to go to the Philippines as well as Belize, paid education and training. So if you don't already have an MPH or a PhD, the Air Force will pay you to get that. There's also one opportunity a year for a CDC EIS fellowship. So the Air Force sponsors one CDC EIS fellow a year typically. And then a plethora of military related training, everything from national security training, military planning training, to even some NATO related training. I actually got to go to Europe and study French at a NATO school for 2 weeks. So training, that you wouldn't think you would be able to get in the military. There are plenty of opportunities. I already mentioned the activation opportunities for the reservists. And then in general, just cool experiences that you would never really get anywhere else, like getting to watch an F-22 be refueled over the Alaska range, obviously in Alaska. And then the picture on the right was when I did some training with the Army, and you'll hear about the Army momentarily. So just cool experiences and things you would really never get to do, which is one of the reasons I love the Air Force so much. Hopefully by now I've convinced you that the Air Force is awesome and you want to be a public health officer. So education-wise, all you really need is a veterinary degree from an AVMA accredited institution. So hopefully everybody either has that or is on their way to getting that. And then of course it is the military, so you will need to pass a physical exam and a background check and all that. If you are interested in joining, I recommend contacting a health professions recruiter specifically, because they will know what positions are open, what the availability is, and what kind of offers they can provide to you. So for vet students, there are often 1 or 2 year scholarship opportunities. And for veterinarians that have already graduated, there may be loan repayment or various types of signing bonuses. And those change every year based on what the Air Force needs. So that's why getting in contact with a health professions recruiter specifically is going to get you the best information as to what might be available to you if you decide to join. I have to give one caveat after I talked about how much I love being in the reserves. To be a public health officer in the reserves, you do have to already be qualified as a public health officer. We don't have a training pipeline to bring in new public health officers into the reserves at this time. So you would have to start out on active duty or the Guard. And I didn't talk much about the Guard because I don't have that experience, but it's very similar to being a reservist with some unique aspects associated with being in the Guard because you also belong to a state. So if you're interested in the Guard, I could find somebody else for you to talk to about that. Next. All right, that's the end. So I know I went through that really quickly. Please feel free to email me at any point in time if you have any questions. And then if you are interested in finding a recruiter, that is the link for you. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So now that we've heard the Air Force side, I'm going to cross over and talk to you about the United States Army side. So my name is Major Terry Schlancer, and I'm currently serving on active duty as the Executive Officer for the United States Army Veterinary Corps Chief Office here in Fort Sam Houston, Texas. So what does that mean? What do I do? Currently in this role, our office manages the training, recruitment, and retention of our veterinary corps officers across both active duty and then even crossing into the reserves some as well. We also manage any strategic initiatives of our corps chief, and we work very closely with the Department of Veterinary Science at our Army Medical Center of Excellence here at Fort Sam Houston. So my previous experience, I've been on active duty now for 9 years. I graduated in 2012 from Mississippi State University, and I commissioned as a captain through the Health Professions Scholarship Program. So a very similar program as you just heard about. On the Army side, to get the scholarship, we offer a 3-year scholarship. So you would apply for that during your first year of veterinary school, actually your first semester. Typically, those applications are viewed in December for boarding, or people can come in through direct accession later, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. My previous experience is prior to being the executive officer for a corps chief, I completed long-term health education and training. So what that meant is that I had the opportunity to go back to school full-time. I did a Master's of Public Health up at the University of Washington and some research with their CDC Center of One Health Research for 2 whole years. So my only job was to just serve basically as a civilian and get that education and then bring that knowledge back to the Army. Prior to that, and this is what's kind of interesting with us, I served as the chief of Aviano Branch Veterinary Services for Aviano Air Base in Italy. So I was there for 3 years, and we'll talk a little bit about how the Army and Air Force and Marines, Navy all kind of intertwine in our roles at those locations. And then before that, I was the officer in charge for Redstone Arsenal Veterinary Services in Huntsville, Alabama. All right, so Veterinary Corps, who are we? We are adaptable, highly educated technical experts with versatility to lead and foster healthy communication communities across the Joint Force in garrison or deployed in austere, challenging environments across the globe. And you see, we serve everyone in the Department of Defense. So regardless of what installation a military service member and their family may be assigned to, whether that is stateside or a CONUS, whichever branch of the military, they are at a very minimum supported by an Army veterinarian, whether that be through the food inspections that we do for the food that they are able to purchase and consume safely on their installation or during a deployed environment, or if we're actually there on the installation providing veterinary services for the military working dogs, military working equines. Hey, some sites even have military working dolphins. So there's just kind of a variety of animals that we provide service to. Globally, we're also engaged with global health engagements, which basically means looking at ensuring we have stability in areas of interest across the globe. And that may mean that we're working with communities and their herds to make sure they have healthy food sources, looking at public health from a veterinary public health side. I guess the easiest way that I usually explain it is in the Army Veterinary Corps, we're kind of a choose your own adventure. And any veterinarian that you talk to within the Army, and I know there's several also on this call, is going to have a very different story and different experiences to share of what led us to where we are today. And you see in this picture, there's just kind of a good representation of what a day or a week may look like, whether it's doing food inspections one day to taking care of military working dogs in the Capitol, supporting the presidential inaugurations another day, to supporting our DoD research. It's just a could be something different every day. So it's definitely a career field where if you like to stay away from the monotony of doing the same things and are willing to experience new things and new challenges from day to day, then we definitely are a good option for you. Next slide, please. So our mission in the Army Veterinary Corps is to take care of people across the spectrum of DoD operations through sustained force health protection, veterinary health service, and support and innovative research to enable readiness and conserve the fighting strength while supporting healthy families, animals, and environments. So there's some military terminology within that mission, as would be expected, but the main takeaway here is that the foundation of what we do as Army veterinarians is to take care of people. So this graphic that you see here on your right is kind of a good little Venn diagram here that takes our main pillars of our mission and shows how they're intertwined. So whether it's veterinary public health, so we don't do as much with the STDs and hearing and some of the things like our public health officer counterparts do on the Air Force, but we work actually hand in hand. I experienced this a lot at Aviano Air Base when, for example, we had a leptospirosis potential outbreak among service members and a positive pet, and that was a reportable disease in Italy. So the public health officers and myself worked very, very closely from both the human side and the animal side to ensure that we investigated and we're working with our Italian counterparts as needed, as well as reporting everything through both the military and civilian chains of reporting. So we also do food protection. On the Army side, we do everything that is in a commercial sanitary facility. So this may mean that one day you may find yourself when you're stationed in Washington auditing salmon. In Italy, I had a lot of really cool audits that included auditing Parmesan in the town of Parma, feta in Greece, and just getting to go all over the globe, a lot of bottled water throughout Africa, because basically we want to make sure that our service members and their families have a safe source of food. And while our USDA counterparts do, of course, an excellent job stateside in ensuring this, when we're looking at ensuring the standards for our food quality and safety across the globe are equal, that's where the Army veterinarians come in, and we provide that standardization throughout a multitude of different countries to look at the food and make sure it's meeting our whether it's pasteurization of milk or other standards. And then we have animal medicine here. So our veterinarians are in clinics, and we are providing our care for military working dogs and our pets of personally owned animals. I say we're one of the biggest proponents for One Health that exists out there. I became even more convinced of this after doing my MPH in One Health at University of Washington. But the way that the military as a whole, all of us on this call can work together to understand the interconnections of public health, animal medicine, food protection, research, all of these things is really pretty incredible. So us being in those clinics, seeing our personally owned animals of our service members and making sure that they are vaccinated for rabies and free of zoonotic disease and able to move with their service members, just looking at the human animal bond that the pets and their families share, we play a really integral part of that. And then research and development, this is huge. We have a lot of our veterinarians that have specialized in lab animal medicine or pathology or have gotten PhDs and are heavily involved in research. With COVID, of course, you can imagine this pulled a lot of our veterinarians into the spotlight for the activities that they're doing. And you may wonder how we can do all of these things. I see us as kind of a jack of all trades, especially as we come in as kind of your practicing military medicine and being a generalist. And then as we continue, we specialize into a certain avenue, whether that be public health or clinical medicine. So our pay and incentives, I just have this here really for your information. And of course, there's a lot of great benefits that you can find online. Some things that are not always mentioned as transparency, but maybe they should be in the military and across the board here are the different benefits we get even through the GI Bill. So for example, I have a 2-year-old son whose college is already paid for just through my service. So you get all of these benefits, not only for you, but through for your family as well. And I will throw out here that there's a retention bonus for preventive medicine veterinary officers. So what that means is somebody in the Army, a veterinary corps officer that has achieved specialization in the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine gets an extra bonus of pay. And this is even greater than the normal retention bonuses for our veterinary corps officers. So a pretty awesome advantage if any of you guys are ACVPM diplomates that are considering a career change over to the veterinary corps. All right, so eligibility, meeting the physical professional standards for appointment of an officer, being a US citizen. There is an age requirement that is waiverable, and being a graduate of an accredited veterinary school. So I have a group email here if you have any questions or want more information that you can reach out to. I understand it's a really long one, but on the next slide, I have my personal information here as well and my cell phone number. So if you heard something today that sparked your interest and would like to hear more, please feel free to reach out to me directly or that group email box as well, and I will get back to you. All right, thank you so much.
Unmute myself. Hello, everybody. If you want to catch me in uniform, that will be tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday. Today, I'm at my USDA job. I have a home duty station where I'm a field veterinary medical officer in Olympia, Washington. Let's see. I've been with APHIS since 16, and in Olympia, Washington, I serve mostly, I do a lot of aquaculture work up here. So when the other officers talked about, you never know what you're going to do or where you're going to be, and there's a variety of things, certainly wouldn't have predicted that I would have been here doing finfish and shellfish medicine, but here I am, and it's all very interesting and definitely like the variety. How did I get to now? I was in private practice. I was active duty for my first 3 years out of veterinary school. And then I went into private practice. And from private practice, I reconnected with one of my Colorado State classmates who got me interested in joining the reserves, because after active duty, I didn't really think too much of the reserves as an option. We're supposed to be counseled about that when you get off active duty. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. But through her, I was able to get into the reserves and have been there ever since. Through that path, I started with the USDA as an export veterinary medical officer, did that for a year in Ohio, but as a reservist, then got mobilized to Germany and found a great opportunity there to become the non-appropriated funds veterinarian. And I stuck it out there for 5 years. It was a great place to live. And during that time, I got into civil affairs and joined a civil affairs unit over in Europe, and have been with civil affairs ever since. I deployed to Djibouti while I was there and did some things around the Horn of Africa, and then came back to the United States, used my GI Bill to get my master's in peace operations policy. And then once I got that, I rejoined the USDA, and that's how I got to be a field VMO here in Washington. So my kind of going over to the next column, I was 3 years the officer in charge at Tyndall Air Force Base, the veterinary treatment facility there. And then, like I said before, I got mobilized to Europe for a year, got into civil affairs while I was in Europe, and deployed to the Horn of Africa 7 months. And then I was still recently, I deployed to the Horn of Africa again for a year, and that was in 2019. And I've been either with a unit here in the Pacific Northwest or in Hawaii since then. So with the unit that I'm getting ready to rejoin, I currently assigned to a unit in Hawaii, but I'm transferring back to the 364th. I'm the veterinary public health and welfare officer. And what we do in civil affairs is a little bit different than what we do in the regular veterinary corps. As a veterinary corps officer, we focus on partner nations and improving their capacities. So the things I do in the USDA really complement what happens when I go on deployments or work with partner nations to improve their veterinary and public health governance programs that they have. And I've been on exercises more than I can count, deployments, a couple of those and a mobilization. So definitely some time away from home. Interesting stuff that you get to do, interesting opportunities. And a lot of veterinary corps officers or a lot of veterinarians want to get into the military, and many of their ideas are kind of a lot of what we do in civil affairs, where you see somebody working with a herd of goats or whatever, working with our partner nation counterparts. My recommendation, because instead of going straight into civil affairs, is to go into the veterinary corps first and be a traditional veterinary corps officer, because you want to learn your trade as a veterinary corps officer before going into the deep end, which is civil affairs. Because if you go straight into civil affairs, you run the risk of kind of getting run over. And you have to be careful about that, and getting pointed in ways and used in ways that maybe you shouldn't. And you don't know when to say, oh, that's actually not what we do, or we don't have the capacity to do that. And then you give the impression that, oh, that's what veterinarians do. We can have, you're just a veterinarian. We can have you do this, that, and the other. And that's not always the case, and it's not good for the mission. And that's why it's important to become a regular veterinary corps officer first, learn all that first, so you really understand what the various missions are within the military and what your role as a veterinary corps officer is within the missions. And then you can, go to all your professional military education, and it's a great place to network for various opportunities. So it's good for that too, because when you're off in civil affairs, you might be kind of by yourself as a veterinary corps officer. You're not as connected with the veterinary corps as when, like, say, you're active duty or you're in a veterinary detachment in the reserves. Yes, and I put this in from Justice Sotomayor. As for the possibility of having it all, career and family with no sacrifice to either, that is a myth we would do well to abandon, together with the pernicious notion that a woman who chooses one or the other is somehow deficient. And I've run into this a lot. One thing I just want to touch base on a little bit is that people understand it's very difficult to have it all. It's very, 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 very difficult to have a full-time job, work a part-time job as a reservist, and try to get your, whatever your advanced degree is, your MPH, or working on your ACVPM diplomat status, studying for that test. Those spinning plates are going to drop, and there are going to be sacrifices. So you really have to choose, and choose carefully, because it's a myth that we can have it all. It just looks like it on the surface a lot of times, and don't be fooled by a lot of what you see, and think very, very carefully about joining the military. It's a huge commitment, and it will take a lot of your time and things that are unexpected, and time away from your family. And you need to have a strong support structure in place that can bear the burden of you being away, because that's a huge test for a lot of people and their personal relationships, is being away. So I know it's a little different than what the other officers touched on, but it's something I just want to bring some reality to anybody's expectations. There are difficult choices that unfortunately we have to make as part of this career, and it doesn't always turn out for the best. You can have some difficult times ahead of you. On the other hand, you can have some great times. Some of my best friends in the world I met on deployments that I'm still close to this day, and that's really important. Some of the best professional experiences I had were because of deployments and things that I've done in the military. But just know that's not the only way to get those experiences. It's not the only way to help other nations progress in their veterinary medicine capacities. So I just want to leave you with that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have about your thoughts on joining the military, what kind of pressures it might bring, what are the pros and cons of it, because there's definitely both.
Hi there, I'm Captain Renee Funk in the U.S. Public Health Service. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career in public health and how I got into the U.S. Public Health Service. Starting out, I am a veterinarian's daughter, so my dad is retired now, but had a whole career doing embryo transfer on cattle, and I started working with him at a very young age, so that certainly piqued my interest in veterinary medicine. And then I went to Iowa State Veterinary School, and really I went to vet school because I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. I was I knew it was a broad degree, it was an advanced degree, but a broad degree, and I hoped that I would figure it out. So basically, when I took my first public health class in second year of veterinary school is when the light bulb went on for me, and I was like, ding, that's what I want to do. All my classmates thought I was strange, and I mean, public health is much more popular now. And so let's see. And on this slide, I did the CDC Epi elective, which is something veterinary students can do in their fourth year of veterinary school during their rotations. They can come to CDC for 6 to 8 weeks, and I was assigned to the rabies section, which was really great, working with Kathy Hanlon. Many of you probably know her. She's been in rabies for a long time. And I was also able to go on an outbreak investigation with Marta Guerra, who is a great veterinarian at CDC still. And we worked on Q fever outbreak in Wyoming. And so it was the first time they'd had Q fever in a goat herd, and it was very concerning. There were some human exposures in the veterinary laboratory, as well as the family that was working on these goats. And so it really made me feel like, okay, I want to go to work at CDC as soon as possible, sooner rather than later. And so first I needed to get a master's in public health. So at that time, Iowa State didn't have a master's in public health program. And like they do now, they have the dual degree program. And so I went to Tulane, and I had a great experience there. My concentration was tropical medicine, and actually there was a lot of military officers in my class, and so that was really nice to help me get exposed to the military. And I ended up getting, starting my in processing into PHS while I was still there, and so they were all very helpful. I should say I also worked part-time at a small animal clinic while I was in New Orleans, and that was a great experience to be able to put my veterinary skills into practice. So at the end of my public health schooling, I applied to the EIS Epidemic Intelligence Service program at CDC, which is another training program. It's a very common way that veterinarians enter CDC. And at that point, I was able to select either joining the U.S. Public Health Service or the Civil Service. I have to admit, they didn't give me very much information about it. I was basically told, would you like to join the U.S. Public Health Service where you get paid more, or join the Civil Service where you get paid less? I was like, more, I guess. So anyway, we worked with the EIS program, and they give much better information now to make sure people have full understanding of the public health service when they're joining. But anyway, this was my officer basic training course as we were entering in 2002. And also, I could just say as a side note, 2002 was a very interesting time because we were the first class after 9/11. And so even though we didn't get to work on the initial 9/11 response, there was still a lot of white powder incidences going on, and we still had to do a lot of bioterrorism training and all sorts of things. So anyway, we still got in on it somewhat. Just to tell you a little bit more about EIS, it is a 2-year paid training program in applied epidemiology. I've got the starting salaries there and maybe getting a little bit old. I haven't checked those lately. And you either get assigned to CDC headquarters or state health department. I personally went to state health department in Kansas, and that was a really great experience. If you go to the next slide. And okay, yeah, here's about PHS. So just to tell you a little bit about PHS, and hopefully Andrea will tell you a little bit more as well. You can be assigned anywhere within in Department of Health and Human Services. And then additionally, we have some memorandums of understanding with some other federal agencies. So that includes USDA, Department of Homeland Security, EPA, a variety of others. So I have always served in CDC, but certainly many people move around more than I have. So while I was in Kansas, I got to work on the first outbreak of SARS, which now seems so small and manageable compared to this one. But at the time, it was very dramatic. And monkeypox, hopefully you all are aware of that outbreak, but it was quite interesting. The prairie dogs involved actually came from Kansas, so I was involved in that piece. And then I also got to deploy to Wisconsin and interview the prairie dog owners in Wisconsin. Next, I went into the preventive medicine residency or fellowship, which is a really great program they have at CDC where both physicians and veterinarians are able to do the same preventive medicine fellowship program, which is pretty unique. I'm not aware of any other place that does that. And so it's a 1-year training program focused primarily on leadership and policy. And I always say between the EIS and preventive medicine residency, you become one fully functioning CDC staff person at the end of this. And so for this, I was assigned to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health in Morgantown, West Virginia, which I really love, and got some really great exposure to the work of occupational health, and including popcorn workers' lung. I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but the artificial butter flavoring inhaled by workers caused very severe lung disease called bronchiolitis obliterans, where they need lung transplants. And so it led to some changes in how the process is done, as well as changes in the type of butter flavoring used. Then just to touch, I'm wrapping up here, I swear. Public health as a career. This is the point where I decided to become board certified in the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine. And it was important to me, even just as I was entering the public health field, to know that this was an area that I could specialize in, that was an area of expertise. And board certification to me was important to demonstrate that I am an expert in the field that I have dedicated myself to. And then additionally, you're here in ACVPM, but there are some additional really great organizations that you might want to consider. The National Association of State Public Health Veterinarians, they have a great listserv where you can kind of see the type of questions that they have and how those get answered. Very interesting. And then the American Association of Food Safety and Public Health Veterinarians, I'm also on the board there. So they get a little bit more involved in public health policy work. And so it's quite interesting. I'm not going to go over all the additional positions I've had since then. I will just summarize it to say that in the U.S. Public Health Service, we're responsible for moving around to different positions ourselves. And so, although for promotions and things, you certainly get more credit for moving around and things like that. But it is possible to stay in a certain geographic location, that sort of thing, if that's important to you. And so I've had a very fulfilling career in PHS. I've been in for 19 years. I'm actually eligible for retirement next year, which I'm still considering. Anyway, I'd be happy to take your questions, and Andrea will hopefully tell you a little bit more about PHS as well. I think the next slide is my contact information if you'd like to reach out to me. Thanks.
Thank you, Captain Funk. So I am Andrea Cote. I'm also in the Public Health Service as a Lieutenant Commander. So I'm much newer than Captain Funk. So I am currently a epidemiologist at USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service, and I am the epidemiologist for USDA embedded at CDC in their Outbreak Response and Prevention branch. So I am here in Atlanta. Prior to this position that I'm in now, I was on the same staff at FSIS, but in Washington, D.C. And then previous to that, I did the CDC EIS fellowship that has been talked about multiple times as an officer in a state health department. So I was in Wyoming. And then previous to that, did clinical practice. So at FSIS, I just want to go over a little bit of what I do. So obviously our mission is to ensure meat, poultry, and egg products are safe and that they're properly labeled and packaged. But in my current position, I work in the Office of Public Health Science. So we're responsible for taking that information, reviewing it, and then reporting out scientific information. So working predominantly on foodborne outbreaks, consumer complaints, where the general public can report either foreign objects, whatever they may find in their meat, poultry, and egg products. And then we work very closely with state, federal, and industry partners. So very obviously closely with CDC, but FDA and all of our state and territorial partners. And then also working on a variety of projects. So I'm working on analytic groups with identifying food attribution. So if you are interested, just to plug in for FSIS, we do have a variety of positions open in FSIS, whether it be in an establishment or policy, epi, microbiology. There is contact information for Dr. Esteras. So just a little bit about me. With the Public Health Service, I've been able to see what I've done in my agency impacting public health. So obviously working for a food safety agency, I'm able to see the proper label, purchasing products. I do work on recalls, so seeing recalls and information going out to the public. Also have been able to participate in a variety of public health responses, whether that be the ongoing pandemic or hurricanes, and also was able to participate in a remote area medical mission, helping provide healthcare and update on zoonotic diseases to the public. And I still practice clinical medicine on the side. So I just wanted to give some information about the Public Health Service. So we were established in 1889 to protect public health. Our operational command follows under the Surgeon General. This is the previous Surgeon General, General Adams, or Admiral Adams. And our current Surgeon General is Dr. Murthy, who previously served in the as our Surgeon General. So the Public Health Service, when it originally was created in 1798, it was to provide health care for seamen coming back from overseas. Over the years, we've done a variety of activities. So in 1878, the Quarantine Act that was put in place was to prevent introduction of diseases into the United States, such as smallpox, yellow fever, and cholera. It was formalized in 1889, as mentioned previously. Later in the time, we brought in powers and expanded to other categories of officers. So in 1930, expanding to others, and then 1947, the first veterinarian was commissioned. So who is the Public Health Service? So we are the service, the uniformed service protecting health. There are over 6,000 officers across 11 professional categories. So other than veterinarians, there are medical doctors, nurses, engineers, really anyone who can impact public health. And we are one of 8 uniformed services, so we've heard from some of the others today. So our mission is to protect, promote, and advance the health and safety of the nation. We have 4 core values. leadership, integrity, and service and excellence. And these help to expand our mission. So what do? We respond to a variety of missions, domestic and international. We work closely with other services and multiple agencies. We provide humanitarian, disaster relief, emergency response, and global training. So there are a variety of things you can do in the public health service on top of serving in a federal position. Just some information on the COVID-19 response. Over 4,500 officers have deployed, and there's been at least 200,000 deployment days. I can personally state that I have responded, and I've met Captain Funk, and while hearing from others have responded as well. So here's just some pictures of officers working on a variety of responses for the pandemic. So in the veterinary category, there were approximately 80 of us in 2020. The numbers are constantly changing with officers retiring, but also new officers coming in either through positions at FSIS or the EIS program. So for the public health service, veterinarians serve a variety of roles. I'm an epidemiologist, but there are lab animal clinicians. There are individuals working in policy, food safety inspectors, working on the National Veterinary Response Team. There have been individuals working at the Indian Health Service, so a variety of positions and places you can work. A DVM is required, but most officers do have additional degrees if you're joining this route. And so Captain Funk kind of mentioned it, but we predominantly work in health and human services. So most officers are at CDC, FDA, NIH, but there are other positions such as myself, so working at FSIS, EPA, DHS, and National Park Service. On top of the commissioned officers, we do have the Ready Reserve. So with the CARES Act signed in March of 2020, similar to other services, we do have the Reserve Corps, which is similar, the 2 days a month, and they're the first officers have just finished their officer basic training for the Ready Reserve. So I know I covered a lot of information, but I've provided my contact information there. So if there's any questions on the public health service, different positions, either FSIS or the EIS program, please let me know.
Want to go ahead and answer a few questions or ask a few questions. The first question I want to ask, and if we can just go around to each of the services, a couple questions about training programs, whether the respective uniformed service has a programs for additional educational programs. So we'll start with the Air Force.
Yeah, so I touched on it briefly in my presentation, but there are opportunities to either get your MPH or a PhD or another degree of your choice, as long as it's somewhat related to public health and would serve the Air Force. Usually you have to do about 2 duty assignments first, so you're maybe 6 or 7 years into your career at that point. Before the Air Force would pay you to go back to school. And then depending on how long that school was, you would incur an additional active duty service commitment after that. So there are definitely opportunities for further education. And then, as I mentioned, the CDC EIS program as well is another kind of additional health education type program that is available to public health officers.
The Army, Dr. Schlanzer.
Oops, sorry, it took me a minute to come off mute. Yes, there are so many. So whether it's, we talked a little bit about public health, and that's not limited to a master's of public health, that could be a doctor's of public health, or the EIS opportunity like others have spoken about, or a doctor in food science. We also have lab animal medicine residencies, veterinary pathology residencies, clinical residencies in emergency critical care, surgery, internal medicine, radiology, sometimes equine, even though that one's kind of rarely offered. We have PhD opportunities in almost any scientific field you can imagine. So yes, lots and lots.
Public health service.
Yeah, same. So you can do long-term training while on active duty. Generally, you incur 2 years of obligation for every 1 year of training. So if you did a 4-year PhD program, for example, you would owe 8 years after that. There is a mechanism, we're talking to veterinarians, but there's a mechanism to go to medical school at the Uniformed Services University. And there's a whole separate requirement for that. But
okay. Another question, and because I know Dr. Schlanzer, I'm going to direct this towards her, is if you are married to a spouse who is a doctor in the U.S. Army, do they deploy and or station you at the same place?
So they do their best. It is a little easier if you're in the same service. So for example, my husband and I are both active duty Army veterinarians. I know many, many Army veterinarians that are married to active duty service members, whether they are Army medicine or elsewise. And I would say most of the time, as long as there is the opportunity for that person to be stationed in the same location as you, the Army will do everything that they can. From what I understand, the Air Force is very similar. I think that, the military has taken a shift to people being the number one priority. And in that, they have an understanding with shifting demographics, the number of families that are serving, et cetera, that being able to kind of facilitate that need for families is incredibly important to sustain our personnel across the board. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me directly and we can absolutely talk about that a little bit more. Now, I will disclaim that with every situation is unique, right? So those experiences may vary, but I will say myself and my husband have been able to be stationed together as long as we have been together, with the exceptions of, some temporary duty where we may spend a couple weeks away, but permanent station they've done everything they can to put us here together. Over.
Dr. Smith, anything to add on that from the Air Force perspective?
Yeah, so I was typing a chat in to answer the question, but very similar if you're Air Force married to Air Force. If you're Air Force married to Army, they will try to keep you close by, but it's not often that there are Air Force and Army installations located near each other. So in some of the bigger military locations like Alaska and Anchorage, there's an Air Force installation next to an Army installation. In Texas, there are a lot nearby. So it is possible, but I can't guarantee that would happen throughout your career if you were married, different services, just because of how far apart the installations are. Sometimes they would try to keep you close, but you might not end up being in the same state. And that's just the unfortunate reality of two different services and those individual services needs. While they do try to accommodate you, they do come first, and they can't always guarantee that they'd be able to station you, especially when you're working with two different services.
Any perspective from the Public Health Service?
What was the question again about?
If a service member, a uniformed service member, is married to another uniformed service member, does that service, or do the services work to get them in the same location?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, the officer is actually responsible for finding their own positions within PHS. PHS does not have a centralized system where they move you around. So, it would just be you and your spouse, finding positions through USA Jobs or whatever, and staying together that way.
Okay. Excellent answers, and my experience has been over 30 years. I can't remember any married Army couples or married couples who didn't get stationed pretty close together. Now, some of them had a 45-minute to an hour commute, or both of them had an hour commute, but they got them close together where they were able to live in the same home. So the services do a fantastic job of taking care of the families. I'm going to ask the question regarding recruiting. There's several questions regarding recruiting, and I'll just go down the list and ask if any of the services, if attendees or registrants have questions on recruiting, how best can they reach out to a recruiter or to you. So we'll go with Dr. Speth with the Air Force.
Sure. So I included that link on the last slide of my presentation, how to find a recruiter. It'll take you to a website and you put in your zip code and it'll pull up the nearest recruiter. Again, remember to select the health professions recruiter because that's who you're looking for the public health officer roles. If for some reason that doesn't work or you reach out and the recruiter doesn't get back to you or you have any problems, feel free to email me and I will find a way to get you a recruiter.
Dr. Schwanzer?
Yes, so I will type the website for Army Medicine recruiters, same as Air Force. We have our Army Medicine specific recruiters that are who you want to speak with. But if you have any issues with them, you can either contact us through the group email box that was in the slides or my personal one. I answer the group one too, so either one works. But I will type that in the chat for everyone so it's a little bit more readily available.
And either Dr. Cote or Dr. Funk.
Yeah, for public health service, you can reach out to us, but there is also usths.gov that if there are questions regarding information on medical or whatnot, they have someone where you can talk to and they will let you know if you're pre-qualified, then you can start applying for positions, but I will also type that in the chat as well.
Same. I'd be happy to answer questions. And yes, Andrea and I can get you connected to the PHS. They're not really recruiters, but I forgot exactly what they're called. The CAD officers, whatever CAD stands for, that help you with the actual application process.
Fantastic. We have hit our hour, so I don't think we'll be able to get to some of the other specific questions. What I'm going to do is this session is being recorded. I will send out a link early next week to everybody that registered, and we'll include the various links and contact information in that email message to all the registrants. So if you'd like to reach out to one of these uniformed services professionals, you'll have that information to do so. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Boll for any closing comments.
Thanks, Dr. Turing, and thank you to our panelists. That was excellent. To everyone that is listening in today, I hope that was helpful for you all. And as you see on the last slide there, if there are more veterinary career fields that you want to know about, please email the Partners Committee. If you are thinking about becoming an ACVPM diplomat, then you can check out the requirements on the ACVPM website. But we appreciate you all being here today and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks again, everyone. Have a fantastic day.